Good morning to all, and thanks for the present, for the people that are connected from remote. We can begin the work of this interesting meeting, and I can give the speech to Dottoressa Gabriella, ancora the Vice President of the CEO, that is the co-organizer of this meeting. Thank you.
Sì, buongiorno a tutti. Parlerò in italiano, ma siamo ben coperti per la traduzione. E ringrazio per questa iniziativa. Presenterò un momento nostra CIO, la nostra Confederazione Union Quadri. Noi ci siamo occupati, noi siamo al CNEL da molti anni, dal 1989, e ci siamo occupati molto le nostre figure principali che noi tuteliamo e rappresentiamo sono quadri e soprattutto noi figure professionali ricercatori. Ricercatori, abbiamo un'agenzia il cui responsabile, l'Agenzia per i ricercatori e l'innovazione, di cui è responsabile il nostro dottor Crivelli, che dopo ce ne parlerà ampiamente delle vostre iniziative. E abbiamo portato avanti già dopo il Trattato di Lisbona nel 2000, 99-2000, il discorso proprio dei ricercatori, della libera circolazione delle professioni e quindi dei ricercatori in particolare, promuovendo, facendoci portatori di un'iniziativa, di un parere che è stato poi proposto ed è ampiamente andato avanti al CESE, il Comitato Economico e Sociale Europeo, di cui noi siamo parte attiva come società civile, come sindacato dal 1994, e quindi è quella la platea dove poi vengono diffuse le iniziative che facciamo in Italia e viceversa. E le carte blu sono state, penso, una pietra miliare proprio per iniziare il discorso della libera circolazione dopo il Trattato di Lisbona. Abbiamo fatto come agenzia dei ricercatori, vi leggerò alcuni punti che abbiamo portato avanti di proposta, nel senso che il passaggio dall'economia strettamente manifatturiera a un'economia basata sulla conoscenza e quindi le professioni intellettuali, che sono chiamate a svolgere un ruolo fondamentale sia per il miglioramento della competitività delle imprese e dei privati, sia per favorire occupazione qualificata e propositiva. Eccoci qua oggi perché il percorso risulta molto articolato e necessita inevitabilmente di un approccio integrato, in grado di coinvolgere tutti i soggetti nazionali, istituzioni, centri di ricerca, università e altri, nonché rilevanti interlocutori esteri, perché ricordiamo sempre che bisogna promuovere la competitività delle nostre piccole e medie imprese all'estero, quindi sulla scena internazionale. Adesso a questo punto noi come sindacato quale ruolo abbiamo? Perché siamo qui? Diciamo che c'è una nuova accezione del sindacato. Il sindacato in questo momento, noi siamo qui al CNEL, che è chiamata giustamente la casa delle parti sociali, ma siamo anche una platea per diffondere nuovi progetti anche di natura sociale. Pensiamo che è stato proposto qui già tanti anni fa per l'Unione Europea l'obbligo del casco, quindi qui c'è una commissione sulla sicurezza stradale. Ci occupiamo adesso, è passata una legge molto importante proposta da noi su sollecitazione dell'AIOM, l'Associazione Internazionale Oncologia Medica, per l'oblio oncologico, che è stata dichiarata come una legge di civiltà, perché non vi so dire, voi siete dei tecnici, cosa significa appunto l'oblio oncologico, che impediva di accedere al mondo del lavoro, di fare mutui, assicurazioni, prestiti, insomma c'era addirittura adozioni. Quindi ecco, questa è una battaglia, è stata una battaglia di civiltà, una battaglia culturale che ha fatto il sindacato. Quindi il sindacato in una nuova accezione, che deve diventare un'aggregazione diapositiva e non per favorire l'incontro e il dialogo tra soggetti pubblici e privati per l'individuazione di strumenti tecnicamente ed economicamente sostenibili. Adesso rapidamente, qual è il ruolo del sindacato in questa nuova società di grandi trasformazioni? E diciamo che è un ruolo difficile che deve essere assolutamente attualizzato. Il sindacato non si deve limitare a gestire rapporti di lavoro nel vecchio modo, cioè nel vecchio sistema, qual era? Di tutelare strutture con operazioni di salvataggio che stavano in declino e quindi fare interventi di salvataggio che però certo hanno un'ampiezza, una durata illimitata, oppure difendere soluzioni che non trovano più spazio nelle nuove economie. Quindi aprirsi inevitabilmente a nuove soluzioni di organizzazione del lavoro. Ecco che gli interrogativi che ci si pone come agenzia della ricerca è stata questa. Cioè, qual è il nuovo ruolo? Il vecchio concetto di sindacato deve adattarsi a questo processo di innovazione, seguendo le esigenze appunto dell'allargamento dei suoi ruoli, cioè deve fare interessi, però scelte obbligate. La forza del sindacato si deve rappresentare nella sua forza in termini di legittimazione, influenza e rappresentanza. In breve ci sono domande che ci si pongono in questo tempo, cioè il significato è ancora un significato, il sindacato ha ancora un ruolo, può rappresentare ancora gli interessi collettivi dei lavoratori? Esiste uno spazio significativo per questa rappresentanza? Cosa possono fare i sindacati per dimostrare la loro utilità e la loro capacità di colmare questo spazio? Ecco che la conseguenza che come in questo periodo, paradossalmente, non è che si perda come si pensa la rappresentanza delle fasce più deboli e precarie della forza lavoro, quanto il pericolo e il rischio di perdere la rappresentanza dei segmenti più qualificati e con maggiore potere contrattuale. Noi abbiamo fatto molte cose come agenzia per i ricercatori. Porto un esempio, quadro europeo delle qualifiche per l'apprendimento permanente nell'ambito delle professioni intellettuali. Quindi abbiamo fatto seminari, workshop, oppure la figura del ricercatore nella scuola di base, ruolo attuale e sviluppi futuri, ricerca e nuove tecnologie per la sicurezza dell'uomo, dell'ambiente e del territorio. Ecco, l'economia della conoscenza soprattutto è quella che ormai è il supporto e quindi siete voi i rappresentanti di questa nuova economia. Diciamo che il nostro contributo come C-Union Quadri, quindi rappresentanza dei ricercatori e come agenzia dei ricercatori, sarà quella di sostenere la competitività, le innovazioni tecnologiche e i nuovi sistemi integrati per le attività di ricerca. In altre parole, presentarsi agli interlocutori come un'agenzia di tipo innovativo con una nuova filosofia sindacale, questo è il punto. Cioè, oltre a fare cultura, risulti impegnata a creare esperienze, diciamo noi, per generare competenze. Volevo dire che il professor Riva ci raggiungerà tra poco, giusto stamattina è stato convocato per inaugurare una giornata di studio all'Istituto Superiore di Sanità, forse dopo ci dirà qualcosa, ci porterà il saluto. Il presidente Brunetta l'avete visto, è uscito adesso perché rappresenterà oggi il programma, la proposta sulla previdenza alla Camera come CNEL. Vi ringrazio, noi siamo qui per qualsiasi, resterò presente certamente tutti i lavori e auguri. Buon lavoro a tutti noi e voi.
Se posso, spiego perché ci sono delle carenze in questo momento nel programma. In English, Dr. Consoli is not coming today because Italy has approved the support to the Einstein telescope that is going, hopefully, going to be built in Sardinia. And today there is a meeting at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on this issue. Dr. Mauro Bertelletti is coming and he will represent the ministry in place of Gianluigi Consoli. So I give you back the floor, but just to give the information about it.
So I think that we can begin or waiting for Professor Riva, we can begin the first presentation. And before beginning, I remember that my task this morning is only to regulate the traffic. So I apologize in advance for the speaker, but I will rather strict about respecting the deadline. Each speaker will have a slot of 20 minutes, 15 minutes for the speech, and 5 minutes for question and answer. The only exception will be for the first presentation by Dottoressa Angeletti that take 20 minutes, and any question will be postponed to the afternoon session. So, Laura, if you can present your speech.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. I just take the chance to remember that for the online speakers, we have to sit here and use the computer of the canal while sharing the screen using this device. Okay. As introduction for the conference day, I will take you through the framework of the research employment within the Italian and European landscapes. When we talk about research personnel, we are mainly referring to three kinds of employees: researchers, research managers, and those who carry out research support activities. The first element to be taken into consideration is the Italian framework given for performing research work. And we will go through the framework given for the universities, for public research entities that we will call also APR, and the industrial research centers. As for the university, here we are fully in the field of the public law. The legal status of university researchers is given by a presidential decree, which underlines the importance of the freedom of research and teaching activity. As for the employment framework for the researchers is given by the law, while for the support personnel is given by an NCBA with the representation of ARAN, which represents the public administrations in Italy, university sector. And the content of this NCBA is then transposed within a presidential decree. As for the recruitment and career path, the procedure is the one of the public call, ruled by the law, while the grading system follows the relevant sources of law for researchers and for support personnel. When we talk about public research entities, we have first of all to consider that they are a numerus clausus, meaning that only the entities that are listed into this legislative decree can be considered as APR for the purpose of the individuation of the relevant legal framework. Most of you will be familiar with most of these entities since they are quite actively involved in the constitution and running also of the ERICs. For the APR, we are somewhere in between public and private law, and also the employee is definition pubblico impiego privatizzato, privatized public employee. The relevant sources are the 5th book of the Civil Code, which is related to the private employment. and the same NCBA that we seen before for university, but for the research and instruction sector, always with the representation of the ARAN. And there are some specific rules that provides for some flexible contractual arrangements for the private sector that are not applicable. Recruiting and career path, as before, go with the public call, while the grading system is given by a presidential decree and then was updated and transposed into the NCBA, and it appears like this. As for the private research employment, we are 100% into the field of the private employment and also of the public-private funding. We have to apply, of course, the 5th book of the Civil Code and all the norms related to the private employment. Moreover, there is to take into consideration the relevant industrial sector NCBA, which is not specific for the characteristics and feature of the research work. In Italy, there is not a legal framework for the research employment, but there are some specific rules that act as exceptions towards the general norm. And one of the most interesting cases is one of the duration of the fixed term contracts. We have two exceptions in this sense. The first one is given by some decrees and several sources of law in Italy, and they affirm that contracts signed by entities which deals with the research activity can last for 36 months instead of 24, and do not have to comply with the 20% limit, which is the ratio between fixed-term contracts and permanent contracts. The other one, even more interesting, is the Article 23 of the Jobs Act, who links the duration of the fixed-term contract to the duration of a research project in case the sole purpose of the contract is the carrying out of the research project. So we have been examining the university context, the APR context, and the private context, but almost none of the entities represented here belongs to one of these types. This is because we are in a fourth box of framework, which is the one of the entities regulated by the private law, but funded by the public subject. And we are talking about research institutions that here we will call third type research institutions, and ERICs with a more detailed view on the ERICs operating in Italy. Beginning with the third type research institutions, the sources of employment law are the same of the private law, with the difference that we do not have to apply a sector NCBA since it does not exist. And even if the industrial NCBAs are not the most suitable to rule the research activity, the research work, the lack of a sector NCBA has some implications in terms of the lack of regular professional recognition, job description, grading system, recruiting, and career path. The consequence is that every research institution sought for a form of regulation which was more suitable for their own needs and circumstances, but it will be explained in detail later. Even if every institution, of course, has done its best to provide for the most suitable framework for its own activities, the lack of a coherent and uniform and tailor-made framework regulation creates some issues in terms of those topics which are related to the management of the careers, which should be ruled accordingly for the specificity, for the features of the research work. And I'm talking about mainly working hours, fixed-term contracts, grading system and job titles, and international mobility, but also the intersectoral one. When we talk about the ERIC, we have to take a step back and consider that they are, first of all, bodies governed by the European law. So they are ruled by the ERIC regulation, the implementing commission decision, and some directives for specific aspects, such as the VAT exemption. Furthermore, we have to consider the national law of the country where the statutory seat is located. So for the ERIC operating in Italy, we have the Italian framework, which is the same of the third type research institutions. There is not a coherent and complete European labor law, but there are only some directives who regulate specific aspects, which can be also waived at national level in medius, and there is not a European collective bargaining. So we have to refer to the legal systems, both for the legal framework and for the bargaining sector. Notwithstanding, we got some input from European institutions according on the topic of our interest. Also, this topic will be further examined in the afternoon. I will simply list the most important topics, which are the European Charter and Code, the European Competence Framework for Researchers, the so-called Research Comp, and the proposal for a Council recommendation on a European framework to attract and retain researchers, which has been just adopted by the European Council, which took a recommendation to provide further support to researchers and research careers in the European Union and to contribute to a more attractive, open, and sustainable European labour market for researchers. The main contents of the Council recommendation are related to providing researchers with better condition careers and mainly fostering the intersectoral mobility. Also, a revision of the Charter and Code has been done, and an operation of framing of the profiles of researchers under 4 profile groups, which embed the researchers, but also research managers and research technicians. Also, this point will be analyzed in the afternoon. I will just show you the examples of occupation for researchers across sector, which has been identified by recommendation. And it's quite a valuable contribution from the European institutions, since the last time that something similar was done in 2011 for the 4 level from R1 to R4, only researchers in the strict sense has been considered, while here a broader array of professions has been considered and listed. This is, of course, in the field, in the path of the new European research area objectives. Mainly, it's related to the promotion of researchers' mobility, skills, and career development opportunities. Going a little bit into details, the new European research area goals in this aspect is the setting up of a comparable and interoperable research careers with the aims of enhancing mobility, simplifying the management of mobile personnel, and providing better careers for researchers and staff. Approaching the conclusion, if we want to assess the legal framework of ERICs operating in Italy, we have to take together the Italian legal framework, which is the same of the third research type institution, which is the private one without the industrial, sectoral, and CBA, plus the European input and requirements in terms of mobility and European labour market for researchers. This means, as you may see, that the issues in terms of management of careers are more or less the same as before, with the adjunction of the issue of the in-kind personnel, which is related to the ERIC juridical nature and will be examined later, and a stronger need of mobility at the European level. So, what can be usefully done in this context can be the creation of a common set of rules for these entities that consider both European and national laws. The focus of this core of law should be the topic that are not regulated by the national laws, since we cannot overlap with the national legal systems. And since the framework is more or less the same, and the issues are shared between Italian ERICs and third-type research institutions, also these rules can be commonly used among these two types of entities. And furthermore, these rules could serve as a best practice for other EU countries to potentially be adopted at the European level. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Laura. Now the second speech is by Dr. Alejandro Furlani, that is.
If you allow me,
Sorry.
Mauro Bertelletti has arrived, so I think we can have an intermission from the welcome from the ministry. You can stay here. If you don't have slides. I know, I have the slide. You have slides? Okay. Laura, your slides. In the meantime, I introduce Dr. Bertelletti. He is the head of the office that looks after, in particular, the ERICs. So let's say 24 or 23 ERICs to which Italy is participating are going through his office, and he's also the one who is responsible to find ways in which they can be supported.
Okay. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for to CERIC for having organized this very interesting day of discussions. And thank you to Carlo Rizzuto, the professor. Thank you to Laura and all the guys. And thank you also to the Council for Economy and Labor to host in this fantastic seat. I wish, first of all, to take here the greetings of the Director General, Mr. Vincenzo Di Felice, that follows with attention all the process of in Italy to participation in the ERIC and in research infrastructures. I wish firstly to stress the fact that after the reorganization of the ministry that have been in two years ago, have been set up an office dealing with the private research institutions and the research infrastructure in the ERIC framework. That are two points that are not so far as we saw, and in the sense that research infrastructure are the base for the research functioning and in the sector. So I wish to recall some concept of on the basis on the ERIC regulation. First of all, the regulation set up, as you know, a framework to establish a research infrastructure that is more easier to set up because it is now a decision of the European Commission. On the other side, a longer process foresee the ratification process by national parliaments. That is a longer process, but it is very important for the sustainability of the infrastructure in the years that there is a law that is an obligatory budget every year. And the issue in the ERIC is that is very easy to set up, but we have to find at the national level mechanism that ensure sustainability in the years. And or other good characteristic of the ERIC is the flexibility, and can be added to the ERIC's consortium, also third countries and intergovernmental organizations, even if, as we know now, there are some problems with some international organization and third countries that European Commission is analyzing for one of the requested ERIC. Italy is very active in the field of participation of this infrastructure consortia. As you see in this table that is taken by the communication of the Commission 428 of the 2023, Italy participates to 23 of 26 of the ERIC. So it's very active. It's the country that's more active than the others. As you see, there are Germany that participates to 15, France that participates to 20, United Kingdom 13. So there are in Italy many communities in all the sectors of research infrastructure that are well organized and give an important contribute. And also for the other three, there is in Italy a community that is active and wish to enter in the ERIC, but as you know, the process is not easy. To ensure the sustainability, financial sustainability on the side of the functioning of the ERICs, ERIC in Italy has been used the ordinary fund for research entities and institutions, called FOE. And the MURA allocated more than 35 million yearly, and on an annual basis, there is a program that has been presented by the research entities yearly, in which there are included the participation to this ERIC and other infrastructure projects aiming to become ERIC or other infrastructure setup projects. And one of the problems that also in the Laura presentation has been put in evidence is that every country pay a contribution participation fee yearly, but also there is an in-kind contribution. Every country participate in the ERIC with the in-kind resources. And one of the problems that we encountered that there is not an unique framework in Europe at European level, and also many ERICs in the statutes foresee different mechanism and not the same mechanism in all the ERIC. Recently has been presented the third report on the application of Council Regulation 723, and the European Commission presented this report, and there are the very good points that's put in evidence that you can find here, and that is a successful instrument has been considered by Europe, the European Commission, and in the framework of ERA, a very good instrument, a very good tool to ensure the development and the sustainability of the research infrastructures, and also to implement the priority of the ESFRI roadmap that have been put in practice, what the ESFRI roadmap have been stated. But as we know, there are on the report, there are some put in evidence some of the points that are critical. For example, as we said, the operational sustainability of the ERICs remains a challenge because there is not a framework. And also, the European Commission, differently from other partenariats or intervention on the Horizon Europe, doesn't contribute to the functioning of the ERIC. So it's on the states, the countries that participate to finance. And also the framework relating to the VAT and excise duty directive is not, the implementation is not equal, it's not the same in all the countries. And so there are some clarification needed in also some countries request to the scope of allowed economic activities or ERICs. That is another point that some countries have been put in evidence. And but also there is also a need with the contact with the industry, with at the level of the implementation of the potential of the research infrastructure in terms of usefulness for industry, for the economics and social framework. And also, as the discussion this day, of the European Commission in this report put in evidence some of the problems, the challenges that are important for the personnel, and are I think I don't talk about that because this is the issue that will be subject of talking of today. But there are many problems in the implementation of the operational on the personnel situation. And last but not the least, has been talked already, Laura, that last 8th of December, the Council have approved a draft recommendation on this sector. I have not to add other, and so that's all. Thank you.
So we can begin with the second speech by Dr. Aleardo Furlani, that is Financial Officer of EMSO ERIC, the European Multidisciplinary Seafloor and Water Column Observatory.
Okay, let's see if you can have a look at the screen this stage. I can see my screen, but I cannot see over there. Okay, hi, Ian. So I apologize for a couple of minutes today because of just to get connection through Zoom, because in fact the connection should take place through Zoom. I introduce myself. I'm very honored to be here with you today. I'm the financial officer of EMSO ERIC, the leading ocean observation research infrastructure in Italy. And in Europe is one of the, we were set up in 2016. And I was appointed from the very beginning to be part of these brilliant initiatives that our country is implementing. I have to say that when I undertook my role, one of the major questions was what kind of status should the employees have in this context? Because we are not an Italian organization. We are not an international organization like the United Nations or FAO. We are sort of new, strange animal that just comes in the arena, and we have to make sure that we apply the rules, but we also have to invent the rules. And I believe this was one of the major challenging tasks that we had to face in the very beginning, to see what rules have to be applied in our situation. I have to say that the European Commission didn't help us too much in defining what was the rule. They say, laissez-faire, and you just follow, what you think is fine, then we go ahead. Then we had to decide on our own, taking our risk in deciding what is the best scenario, what is the best framework to apply the Italian rules. And I appreciated very much the intervention from Mrs. Ancora in the beginning, because in fact, she was questioning in a very critical way also the role of the unions. We have strong traditions about the unions, very important, but we're also very European. So this is the right place to talk about these things here today. So we are Europeans, and we care a lot about the workers, about the employees. So we asked ourselves how to go ahead in a context where the ERIC was a strange thing. It's, well, the first name is not the first name, it's a research infrastructure, ERIC. And it's a non-profit entity, of course. And we have to make sure that we have to apply the most appropriate labor norms that are coherent with the overall, I would say, principles of our constitution and our statute of workers, and at the same time to be compliant with the fact that we have a research infrastructure which has a specific international, European visibility, roles, and personnel. So we decided to go for the status of international organization, because we are international in a way. The fact that we are European does not mean that we are not international. We are an international organization. We are not in Italy, so we are international. There is a clear, let's say, scenario regarding the status of the international organizations. There are certain specific norms applicable for human resources in international organizations, which we applied diligently, also in terms of the collective agreement that has been signed for the international organization. So we decided that being an international organization, applying the rules of the international organization was the right way to proceed in our case. We are all aware that the jurisdiction about any controversy regarding the employment contracts lies within the Italian judge, the Italian national legislation, and then we may stipulate a specific collective labor agreement that we applied during the COVID time, whereas we signed a number of collective agreements with the employees to rule the smart working, the intelligent working, as you wish, and which in fact is something that we applied intensively in our organization, since we have many people who are not Italian. So the employment policies should abide to the laws of the country, as you all know, in which the staff is employed in the ERIC regulations, of course. We decided to apply at highest level, the transparency in communication and publishing all the determinations regarding the status and termination of services transfer about the administrative staff. And then the salary ranges are defined with the limits of EMSO approved budgets. Very important, because once the assembly of members, in our case, name is assembly of members, decides to assign budget, the limits of salary range, salary caps, are to be kept within the threshold established by by the assembly members. There are 2 points I want to make at the end, also regarding what Ms. Riva said, and Mrs. Ancora said. But let me come back to the second part of my presentation. I'm running at about 18 minutes, I believe, so I will try to stay at the expected length of my intervention. So the major issue is here that the ERICs are strange because in a way they are rooted in the national level, but the higher scope is European. So we have our roots, our feet in Europe, in Italy, but we are European, and we looking ahead. Our horizon is Europe as international. So we need to standardize, we need to facilitate. And here I have a few possible suggestions to make sure that in the future, the employment policy is not Mrs. Ancora, just the place where we protect the social rights, which is very important. I would say it's a priority, but it's also the place where we develop the future vision of the institutions, because these institutions are not based on infrastructure. Our infrastructure is based on people, and the way we organize, the way we manage the people has to do with the way we develop our institutions. Defining a general framework for ERIC qualifications, employment qualification, could be a starting point. I believe that Italy is the country which has the right, has the legitimation to start this process because of our story. And an ERIC qualification, employment qualification framework could define what are the basic rights, duties, obligations of ERIC staff all around Europe. Defining the coexistence of national laws and the ERIC statutory goals that sometimes, I would say, is controversial. It is necessary to formulate exemplary or professional qualification, which in fact can summarize what we call it in Italian declaratoria, which has to do with definition of tasks, responsibilities corresponding to the competence of the people. The regulation should be applied at least to all the officers. Could be questionable whether these regulations could also apply to trainees or seconded officials. Mr. Riva made a point when he said that one of the major features of the ERICs is the fact that we have in-kind contributions. But what are the rights of the people in kind contribution? Can they accept or reject the possibility of being assigned as in-kind contribution? What are their rights while they are assigned as in-kind contribution to an ERIC? These are question marks. I don't have an answer for that, but I can say that we all have to have an answer for that as soon as possible, because this is something that is really affecting the careers, the professional perspectives, and why not the salary of the people involved in the ERICs. The ERIC qualification network could be an European initiative. CNEL could be probably the first mover in this arena. A framework including a standard job description and salary caps, implementation of the necessary principles of transparency, non-discrimination, and ensuring compliance of gender balance, equal opportunity goals. We all know that we agree to that, but it's nice when we write it down and we all agree on something which is written down. Policy on respect, non-discrimination and dignity of the people. We all know that we are in Europe, where we know that labor legislation is not the same all around Europe. There are countries where the social dialogue, the protection of the workers is not at the same level as in our country. So there are differences, but we would like to make sure that if we are in Europe, the same rules should be applicable to all the people wherever they are in Europe. Policy on diversity, inclusion, non-discrimination, protection of personal data, reporting of wrongdoing and protection from retaliation, and ruling the conflict of interest, last but not least. Again, the principles could involve an homogeneous practice for hiring personnel here. The procedures are, demanded to the individual perception and willingness. There should be a way by which the implemented rules by the ERICs about the employment policies should be, in fact, coherent and should be applied the same way. A private insurance framework, accessible and tailored to ERIC personnel mobility issues. Launch of lifelong learning. It's important. We're talking about human resource management here. Employment has to do with human resource management. And lifelong learning programs are very important to enhance the capacity building of the people and therefore of the research infrastructures. Enhance ERIC personnel mobility. Very important. Very important. We are not, ivory towers. All those 53, research infrastructure that Mr. Riva was mentioning are not ivory towers. They are connected. There should be bridges amongst them, and the flow of information of people should take place through personnel mobility. They could be horizontal and vertical. Good news for you. This is my last slide. The employment policy is not just an operational issue. It's not an organizational issue. It has a much broader scope. It is a strategic imperative since it's associated to the stage and the quality of mutual relationships amongst the ERIC. So employment policy is not a matter, it's not an affair of an ERIC. It's an affair of all the ERICs. I hope this is clear to all of us, because we're talking about creating a system where the human resources are the basic asset of the research infrastructure, as it is. A common ERIC employment policy should provide an overall gender-responsive vision for the ERICs by promoting coherence between a range of employment contractual instruments. In Italy, we have many. I have to say that we also have some troubles with some of them, but it would be important also to clarify when or where can I apply the contratto di collaborazione coordinata continuativa, contratto a progetto, or whatever. English-speaking people will forgive me for that. But, these are all the strange forms of which, we can use in Italy that we don't know where to apply. And if we apply, we run the risk that somebody knocked at your door and say, you made it wrong. This is what happens in our country. ERIC employment policy should be coordinated with and used as an instrument of development for European research infrastructure. And the role of the unions is very important. The role of the unions, which are now in the process of revitalization, should be considered as being the place where the social dialogue and the social protections are combined, are married with the need to valorize the competences. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aleardo, for this very, very interesting presentation. There are some questions for Aleardo. No, I can.
It's a good sign.
Yeah. I have a question for you. Maybe that's a stupid question, but what kind of form you imagine for this framework of maybe a recommendation of European Commission or a regulation made by ERIC Forum and after go in the national situation?
Okay. ERIC Forum can play a very important role here to coordinate the response from the ERIC and the proposal from the ERIC to the Commission. It could be that some ERICs may not agree in the very beginning. So I don't expect that 53 will say, I agree. I would say that probably 15, 18 may agree, and then the other will follow. It's usually like. So yes, ERIC Forum, European Commission, defining the ERIC qualification framework, employment qualification framework, very simply, and making sure that all ERICs apply these same rules. That's the first step to make it homogeneous, to make it practical, and also to make it effective for the research infrastructure.
Thank you a lot, Aleardo. Other question? No, next one. Before beginning to information, technical information. So the speaker have to enter Zoom and share screen, push share screen, because the PPT are uploaded and open. And another thing, all of the slide will be shared with all of the participants. Thank you. So now the next speech is by Dottoressa Lily Freda of EPOS ERIC. Solid science.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to the organizer for having invited me to this very interesting and needed conference. And thank you for giving me the possibility to present the EPOS ERIC case. So I'm now moving, if you want, in a little bit more practical topics, issues that we face while working for an European Research Infrastructure Consortium. So I prepared here a slide summarizing a bit what research infrastructure is, but thank you to Mauro for actually giving a much complete, comprehensive definition of this. I want just to highlight here, please note that research infrastructure is a complex animal, as also the speaker before me was mentioning. It can be really whatever you need to conduct research and foster innovation. So it's really a complex endeavor. Also, I prepared a slide here to define what an ERIC is, but again, luckily Mauro anticipated me. I want just to highlight that the ERIC is a very powerful tool designed by the European Commission to manage and operate research infrastructure. And it's so powerful that at the moment there are 26 ERICs in place in Europe with their legal seat all around Europe. So now let's go a little bit more into the details of what EPOS research infrastructure is, and allow me to explain what we are actually doing in our mission. So EPOS is indeed a research infrastructure. It's the only research infrastructure in Europe for solid earth science. So that means that all the research activities that can be performed in the framework of solid earth science within a research infrastructure are connected with EPOS. EPOS ERIC has been established in 2018, and it is currently joined by 20 different European countries, so quite a big ERIC. Why EPOS? What behind establishing a research infrastructure like EPOS? EPOS is dealing, as I said, with solid earth science, and solid earth science is the key to decipher chemical and physical processes that trigger and control natural phenomena. I'm talking about earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunami, landslides. And solid earth science is actually allow us to understand the earth processes, to forecast the events, to assess the hazard and mitigate the risk, but also to identify how to sustainably exploit the georesources. So why one single research infrastructure for solid earth science? Why a research infrastructure at European level for solid earth science? Because you are, I'm sure, all aware that natural processes do not respect national boundaries. So you possibly all recall about the Eyjafjallajökull eruption in 2010. So a teeny tiny eruption from a teeny tiny volcano, because it was a teeny tiny eruption, from a teeny tiny volcano up north in planet Earth that had a huge impact all over Europe. So natural processes need to be managed at international level, and also to be understood, they requires cross-disciplinary approaches, because each one of these processes to be understood needs data coming from many different scientific disciplines. And this is exactly what EPOS does. EPOS is taking the enormous amount of scientific data that are generated by many different scientific communities in hundreds of national research organizations all around Europe, put all this data together, make the data interoperable and universally, openly, and free accessible, not only to researchers, of course, as the mission of the EPOS research infrastructure, but also to any other stakeholders. Now, I need to spend a few words on the architecture of EPOS, because EPOS has been built by assembling distinct elements to indeed to allow the system to work although distributed, as a single research infrastructure. So it's important to say that the first element in the EPOS architecture are the hundreds of national research organizations I was mentioning before, spread all around 26 different European countries. And these national research organizations are the places where data are generated. So EPOS is based on the data generated in national research organizations all around Europe, where there are hundreds of researchers producing this data. Then EPOS arrive at the level of what we call the thematic core services. So the national research organizations are outside the research infrastructure, of course. EPOS, the research infrastructure, arrive at the level of the EPOS thematic core services when we have at the moment 10 different scientific disciplines, each one which is own data. And so there are tens of researchers and IT experts working in their own national research organizations to put all this data together, to federate this data in order to make the data interoperable and accessible through one single e-infrastructure, which is the EPOS data portal. So the only one entry point for having access to do all these data. And then it comes the EPOS ERIC. So what I described so far is the research infrastructures. Then we have the ERIC, the tool to manage and operate the research infrastructure. And the ERIC itself is composed by two main components. The Executive Coordination Office, which is set in Italy, because EPOS ERIC is one of the three ERIC set in Italy. So the Executive Coordination Office set in Italy at Istituto Nazionale di Geofisica e Vulcanologia. And in the Executive Coordination Offices, there are all the competencies, all the skill to operate the infrastructure. And then we have another component, which is the Integrated Cross-Service Central Hub. And this is actually the e-infrastructure, which is hosted in France, duplicated in UK, where physically the portal is hosted. Very briefly on the finding model, just to highlight that as you see, there are a lot of in-kind resources to work in a research infrastructures. So if you think on the national research organizations, everything is in kind because there are researchers, IT, administrative people. So everything is in kind. We don't even see what they do there. They are outside the research infrastructure, but without their work, EPOS would not exist. Then we arrive to the thematic core services. And again, a lot of competencies are in kind because the hundreds of scientists that are making all this data federated to be accessible, they work in kind at their own national research organizations. And then there is a little bit of support, financial support from EPOS ERIC, because of course we need to keep connected this work with the EPOS ERIC. Again, it's the same apply to the e-infrastructure, is mainly supported in kind with a little bit of contribution from EPOS ERIC. And then when we move to the ECO, to the Executive Coordination Office, this is fully, totally support by Italy with its host contribution. So this is really an ERIC that without the support of the Italian ministry, we would not manage and operate. But the Italian contribution is both in kind and cash, but it's a different kind of in-kind, if you want, from what I described before. Also, the central hub in France and UK is mainly supported in kind, but in France and in UK, so with the rules of France and UK, and partially also from EPOS ERIC. Now, if we go a little bit into the details of the Executive Coordination Office, of course, the Executive Coordination Office is led by the Executive Director, who is not an employee of the ECO, has a service contract with the ECO, and is actually paid by membership fee. The Executive Director interacts with this ICSC office that, as I said, is managed and operated with mainly in-kind resources in France and UK. So let's not focus on this. EPOS ERIC likely can benefit from key competencies in terms of officers, capacity building, scientific officer and IT officer that at the moment are working in EPOS on a voluntary basis. So we also have this kind of typology. So as far as it lasts, very good. And here it comes the units, the Executive Coordination Office units. There are 4 units in EPOS ERIC, an administration unit, because so we need professional to do administration in-house, management and operation, communication and IT. And there are 8 employees. So EPOS ERIC is actually hiring at the moment 8 people with the skills and competencies I've just mentioned. Are they enough? No. We need definitely in-kind contribution. And this in-kind contribution is really, really important, not only because allow us in a way to balance the budget restrictions, but also because it provides us competencies that it would be possibly even inefficient to hire at EPOS ERIC. I mean, if I need experts for legal services or ethical issues, what's the point of hire one person that might work for a couple of months in a year? I'm looking for in-kind. I'm looking for competencies that are in-kind. And I would like to highlight one experience that we did in EPOS ERIC this year, a seconded person coming from another ERIC, and that was really a great experience that we had in EPOS ERIC, having this mobility of competencies between different ERICs that I really, really advise any ERIC to experience, because it was really, really useful for us. Now, let's go more into the topic. So why does an ERIC needs to hire staff? Why don't we then have everything in kind? Of course, because the ERIC needs to rely on high professional figures that are hired in permanent position to guarantee the management and operation. And also because these professional figures, of course, must be under the direct supervision of the executive director if we want to be efficient. How does an ERIC hire staff? We can use a national collective work contract or define it's our own contract. But of course, there are a lot of advantages in adopting a national collective work contract, because I mean, the rights and obligations are regulated, the salary is updated without discussing this with the governing boards of the ERIC, and also is surely more fair for the personnel. EPOS ERIC indeed choose a national collective work contract, which is the contract for the embassies in short, because this it was considered the most suitable for the flexibility that allows for in favor of the personnel in terms, for example, of indemnities and allowances and working hours. But there are some issues, and the issues are, for example, that the personnel has to be resident in Italy, so it's very difficult to attract people from other countries, that the level of salary cannot be increased at the European level, because of course we have a budget constraint. And also, and this is something I'm experiencing at the moment, there are limitations in the number and duration of short-term contracts, and this limitation de facto in turn limits the participation of the ERIC in a European project, and this is something that really we need to solve. Then why does an ERIC need in-kind personnel? As I said, for example, to overcome budget limitation, because having in-kind personnel, the ERIC can acquire very specific competencies that are not requested as personnel position. But there are some issues, of course. So the highly qualified personnel is made available to the ERIC, but unless it's a secondment, of course, the personnel formally works under the supervision of a different entity. So no, not under the supervision of the executive director. Contracts, working condition, and career progressions depend on the organization where the personnel belongs, of course. And so what we see is really an unfair treatment towards the same level of qualified person. Because, for example, in EPOS ERIC, what we see is that for the same qualification, the personnel hired by EPOS ERIC has a salary which is higher of the personnel hiring at INGV, at Istituto Nazionale di Geofisica e Vulcanologia. And there is no possibility to bridge this gap if this kind personnel are public employees, and which is possibly even more serious, there is no regulation for career and achievements recognition for this personnel. And then I think Mauro was mentioning before, unless partnership or collaboration agreements are in place, actually the ERIC cannot report these in-kind figures in its budget. So, which is the current scenario now for European research infrastructure? So, on one side, the research infrastructure are required to demonstrate their excellence, increase the richness of their portfolio, interact with the private sector, demonstrate their value for a general public, and adapt to new European priorities and challenges. This is, of course, all necessary. I'm not complaining about this, and is also possible, but implies a strong commitment from the country members in terms of resources for the operation of the infrastructure. Whereas what we see now is that there is actually a contraction in the financial support. So the research infrastructure are really struggling to ensure financial sustainability because of budget limitations. We mentioned it a few times already. And also, although the research infrastructure often are included in the national research roadmaps, the support is not guaranteed, and I mean the ERIC has no control, of course, but not even a monitoring on what is happening in the national research roadmaps. So, as a take-home message, an ERIC needs its own staff, permanently employed, and a good labor contract for the ERIC is of course necessary, but is not sufficient to guarantee an efficient management and operation of the research infrastructure. In-kind resources are necessary to cover specific competencies. In-kind resources really help overcoming budget constraints, but they should not represent a significant percentage of the ERIC staff for the reason I said before. At the moment, for example, in EPOS ERIC, the INGV in-kind personnel is already 30% of the total staff of EPOS ERIC, which is quite a lot. In-kind personnel should have the same treatment, salary, work condition as the ERIC personnel, I believe. In-kind personnel contribution to the ERIC should be acknowledged in career paths, of course. Then, don't take me wrong. Working for an European research infrastructure is a terrific experience. We just need to fix a few points. Thank you.
Thank a lot, Lily, for this, again, very, very interesting presentation of your ERIC. There are some questions for Lily.
Thank you. My name is Valentina Romano, and I work at Politecnico di Torino as a research support staff. You spoke about employment contract, mobility, hiring people. How do you consider these people? Researchers, research support staff? And, you know, in Europe, there are two actions One is related to researchers, to the researcher's career, and one is related to research managers' careers, and they are both creating a competence framework. Are you thinking about linking this role and professional figure of the ERIC employer with what is happening at the European level? Are they researchers? Are they research support staff? How do you define these people? Because the definition is the first thing, I think. Then you define tasks and responsibilities, and then you define an employment contract. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I can start answering. So it's an incredibly good question. Thank you. You also have to consider, as I said, the complexity of the different research infrastructures, the fact that there are so many in Europe with different, okay, we all have the same mission of doing excellent research. So of course we need the researchers, but then the landscape is really very, very different. If I can talk with EPOS for EPOS ERIC. So as I showed before, actually, in EPOS ERIC, most of the research activities are done either outside the research infrastructure at the level of the national organizations, or if it is within the research infrastructure at the level of the thematic core services, is mainly provided in kind. So we are talking about researchers hired by the 50 something national research organizations participating in EPOS. In EPOS ERIC, when I talk about hiring people, I'm really talking about completely different figures, no researchers. So I'm talking about administrative people, manager, communicators, IT experts. And so in EPOS ERIC, if you want, is easy because at the level of the ERIC, we define very well these professionals, these competencies. So distinct from the researchers. But there are other ERICs in which at the level of the ERICs, they are mixed. I fully agree with you. And so I think it's a good point. And I don't have the right answer for what you actually asked.
I can add one thing, is that once you go in the mode of research infrastructure, if you are a researcher, you should be somebody who runs an infrastructure for other people. This is not normal for a researcher. So the very important point that as manager of research infrastructures, you have to take into account is to have in-house research to make sure that the support personnel who was a researcher is still capable to understand research. Otherwise, it will not be a very good support for other researchers. So you have a continuous shift or oscillation, if you want, between research activities and infrastructure activities. This brings also to the need, which was hinted by Aleardo, that in these careers, you have to have horizontal mobility. So you cannot separate the career of researchers from technicians or managers. There must be the capability to move on an horizontal level between these three aspects.
I can, sorry. And this is exactly what I was mentioning before when I said we need to guarantee the career of these people that is working in kind for research infrastructure. I'm a researcher myself, and I'm now managing a research infrastructure, and I stopped doing research. When I will be back to my research organization with my career as research blocked for some number of years, of course, my curriculum will be completely, let's say, not improved, because not necessarily when I will be evaluated for my researcher career, they will take into consideration the fact that I worked for a research infrastructure or for an ERIC. So this is a real issue.
I can add, I agree. I think that in the world of research, the world of research need more managerial people than only researcher, and this work must be very evaluated. And I think that I could understand the new idea of European community about the European Union about research. There we need more of this kind of professionality in the future. Now we can invite Stefan Haid, that is Chief of Administration of CTAO, to have the next speech.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Laura. Thanks a lot for the invitation and for organizing this meeting, this conference, which addresses, I think, one of the most important, or maybe the most important element of a research organization. It's people. Talking about people, I'm today not alone. Virginia Gatti will share with me the presentation, who's our HR specialist, and therefore, of course, an essential element of our human resource management. And also Federico Ferrini, as our managing director, is here, and Paolo Vittolani, who gives us advice for many years already. So I would like to give you an overview about the development of our employment framework, which has to be operated on 3 different countries. But okay, let's first of all, CTAO will be the first open ground based gamma ray observatory and the largest, most sensitive instrument for the detection of gamma rays. Currently, we are still organized as a GmbH, as a private German company, which is an interim legal entity for the preparation of the design and implementation of CTAO until the final legal entity takes over, which should be a European Research Infrastructure Consortium, another ERIC. So currently we do have our legal seat in Heidelberg in Germany, while we already have, let's say, the headquarter located in Bologna in Italy, and most of our staff members are working in Bologna, the whole management, the administration, but also part of the project office. Then we have a different, a second site in Europe, which is in Zeuthen, which is located close to Berlin, where we will run our Science and Data Management Center. And then, of course, we have the 2 sites where we will have our telescopes in the future. One is in Spain on the Canary Islands, on La Palma, and the other one is in Chile, in Paranal, which is hosted by the European Southern Observatory. So, as other ERICs, we also work close in cooperation with in-kind contribution teams to provide our telescopes. We work close with the CTA consortium, which has more than 1,500 members, and which represents a scientific community from more than 150 institutes, and that also contribute to the technical and science development of the observatory. So what are our challenges in managing human resources? So first of all, we need to provide attractive and competitive employment conditions. We are a very young organization with little reputation as an employer. So if we want to compete with long-standing employers, public institutions, which have a working stability proved for decades, we need to be attractive and competitive in our employment conditions. Then most of our staff members are highly specialized engineers. So this is usually a very expensive category of labor. And here we compete with the private sector, but also other international organizations who often have a very attractive employment conditions. Then our special, let's say, challenge here is that we employ people in Italy, Germany, and Spain, and we have to respect the labor law of the country or the territory in which staff is employed. And on the other hand side, we aim for an employment framework which is fair and equal to everybody independent of their location. And last but not least, we have to establish an employment framework which is also manageable for a small, let's say, central administration, which is located in Italy, but has to serve these three different countries where we employ people. Then there is let's say, a special challenge when it comes to working time regulations. We face an increasing request for remote and flexible working. So today, when I enter into an interview with a staff member, one of the first questions is, do you have any remote working policy also? Then, of course, as we want to operate an observatory 24 hours, 7 days a week in very remote places, we have to organize our shift work to meet these requirements of the observatory. Finally, we have the challenge that we work with several types of personnel. So, of course, first of all, we have our employees. Then the southern site, which will be operated by ESO, by the European Southern Observatory, will have its own staff. They are not employed by us. Then we have seconded people from partner institutions, which are recognized as an in-kind contribution, but shall be integrated in our organization, that we, let's say, treat them as our own staff members. And then we have a few consultants who also have essential tasks for us. Last but not least, as a research infrastructure, we will go through different project phases, which require different skills and capacities of people. So right now we are in a preparatory phase. We are about to enter into the construction phase, and then maybe 5, 6, 7 years later, we will be in the operation phase and may need different skills and capacities. So how did we, let's say, address these challenges? So this just gives you an overview how we worked on this employment framework. So we collaborated with HR and labor law experts, first of all from CERIC from Italy with Laura Angeletti, and also received some advice by Carlo Risuto. Then we received some support by European XFAL, which is a research infrastructure located in Germany, and by IAC, which is a Spanish Institute for Astrophysics. So to make sure that we have these national perspectives. Then, as in any other employment, of course, the legal relationship itself is then regulated by an individual contract, which makes reference to some staff rules, which is somehow the major, let's say, document in our employment framework. If needed, we make reference to a collective bargaining agreement, to a national collective bargaining agreement, but we aim for a company collective bargaining agreement when we become an ERIC, hopefully soon. And then last but not least, of course, we did some intensive, let's say, research on the labor market in Italy, Germany, and Spain, in private and public sectors, to understand what are the correct salaries to be compared. So the result are some staff rules, as we call them, which is now approved by our council in November 2023 and will be implemented by beginning of next year, by 2024. And they essentially govern the whole regulatory aspects related to the employment relationships between CTAO and its employees. So here you have all regulations about the conditions of employment. Of course, we also say something about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We regulate the recruitment process. We define the professional levels and grades. We regulate the way how we do promotion and advancement and organize the career path. Then we have a large section about the execution of the work relationship, which defines the obligations of the employees, disciplinary rules, the working hours, how people request for leaves and what kind of vacations they have, and so on. And finally, we have one section about the financial conditions, which covers, of course, the basic salary, but also additional benefits and allowances for non-local recruitments. Because I should also say a large part of our workforce comes from all over Europe, but also beyond. Yeah, so we also have people relocated from all over the world to work for CTAO.
So I will delve a bit deeper into some details of the staff roles, in particular levels and grades. So we mapped all the current positions. Okay, I hope you can hear me now. So we mapped all the current positions, but also the positions that we are going to open in the next months and year, as we plan to double our employees. We mapped them into a structure with levels and grades, and the levels reflect the responsibility of the person. So we have levels that goes from A to F, where A and B are the highest ones, and here people have usually responsibility for personnel and budget. Whereas the grade that you cannot actually see in this table are 6, and these reflect the experience, the working experience of the employee. So for example, we could have engineers at level C, but if one has 5 years of experience or 10 years of experience, of course, they will have a different grade. Also, what is important to mention here is that we did not differentiate between administrative staff and project office or engineering, scientific, and technical staff. And as Stefan mentioned before, there is the opportunity to be promoted or to advance in the career. So there is the possibility for horizontal movement, and this means that you go from one grade to the next. And this is based on a performance evaluation carried out every year, whereas a proper promotion can, so the advancement to a higher level can actually take place only through a recruitment process or through a job expansion. And by job expansion, we mean, for example, that a person takes on more responsibility, for example, responsibility for personal or budget, as I mentioned before, and this could also be temporary, on a temporary basis. So I mentioned performance and development, which is maybe a bit particular for our research infrastructure, but we already have a performance system that we plan to improve, of course. This is a continuous process, so the supervisor and the employee will have to communicate very well in setting objectives. And in case the objectives are reached at the end of the year, then there is also a bonus, a performance-based bonus, which is an incentive, of course, for the employee. And after 2 consecutive years of a very good performance, then the employee can advance to the next grade. So I talked about the bonus, but now we can have a look at the basic salary. So you will not see numbers here, but here are the measures that we thought were important in order to be an attractive employer, a competitive employer also on the international market, because we mentioned already that we are very international. And so we decided to position our basic salaries a bit above the corresponding salaries of public, but also private research institutes of that country. And in case a certain position requires, let's say, a higher salary than the one that we have foreseen, we may go for a special allowance, which can be absorbed by future salary increases, of course, according to the position and the labor market. And we also decided that it's very important to continuously monitor the living costs, the inflation and so on by using, for example, the Eurostat labor cost index as an orientation. So our basic salary scales will change during the years. In order to be able then to attract more international employees, also non-EU citizens, we decided that it was important to have an international allowance to cover some of the, let's say, unforeseen expenses that a person can meet when moving to another country. But also, in general, we will support for example, temporary accommodation, also the relocation, as we will pay the education for primary and secondary school, and in case it is needed, of course, also local language courses. So I will leave it to Stefan to conclude.
Okay, just a short summary. So of course, as said, we deal with a very high international competition to attract and maintain experienced and skilled workforce. So this requires some attractive employment conditions. Then we have the specific nature of a multi-sited observatory, which requires some tailor-made employment framework where we could not easily copy, let's say, the employment framework from other institutions, while of course we still received, let's say, some inspiration and ideas from other research organizations. A major challenge for us is to have the competence and expertise in the field of legal, contracting and payroll issues in the 3 different countries. This is a challenge for the administration. And for us, let's say, it would be really desirable to work into the direction of a long-term European employment contract, which ensures fair and equal conditions on all sides, and then also increases the labor mobility of ERIC personnel. So this would be certainly a huge step forward also in the promotion of the ERIC instrument. Thank you very much.
Thanks for this presentation. There are some questions for.
Question. So I think is very important and absolutely appreciated that you are considering to set labor contract that foresee an increase of the salary, so indemnity and so on and so forth. But in a way, this implies that you are dealing with a budget which is increasing in time. And so I would like to also make the comparison between what I presented before. In my case, for example, the budget I can rely on is not increasing in time, is fixed. And is not even corrected for inflation, if you want. So I think you are in a very lucky position, but this is not the same for all the research infrastructure and for all the ERICs.
Federico would like to answer.
This is an important question, but clearly this demonstrates that there is, among all the ERIC, a large variety of situations. So I'm firmly convinced that the general framework for a collective contract for all the ERIC should be established. So this is an item that the ERIC Forum should absolutely, with the national contribution should be discussed. But at the same time, a framework should be established, and then other aspects should be considered, because there are ERIC in which there are needed 5 persons, other where there are 100 persons, like our case. There are ERIC that have budget of 300 kilo euros, other that in operation will have a budget of the order of 30 million. So the variety is so large, the variety is so huge, that one has to establish the basic principle and try also to convince the countries that are involved and want to have an European research area that makes sense, to consider that this has a cost. This should be considered as the basic ingredient for the future, because the operation costs, as you say, are important, because this will allow you to have the correct staff, to do the correct updates of the system, to have a long lifetime. If I understand well, but Carlo can correct me because he's the father of everything here, the European research area Padrino. Okay, that is more important. The European research area has a time scale, an horizon of decades, not an horizon of few years. So this should be a continuous investment, fundamental for all, because the ambition is high. Makes sense, because I believe that the experience of various ERIC is very successful from the point of view organizational work, focusing on the correct objective for the development and improvement of science, having a fallout of innovation. But at the same time, this cannot be done without what can solve all our problems.
And also we definitely need to remain competitive, because at some point, if in a few years the salary I can offer to the people working in an ERIC remain fixed with the external environment changing, I will lose these people. So that we train people, we create competencies, and then at some point we lose them because they go, for example, to CTA that pay them more.
Oh, this is also related, in my opinion, also to the fact that, for example, a salary table should be studied jointly, because a mechanical engineer that works in Lund, or that works in Bologna, or that works in Lisbon, should have the same reference salary, but the cost of life is completely different. So we must be competitive, considering that the salary will be distributed correctly on the same professional career level and career and responsibilities, so that you will not lose your best people because obviously someone else can offer something.
There's a question from the chat from Giovanna Bellis, which asks us what are the tasks of the ERIC personnel. Gianna, do you want to address this question to someone in particular, or to someone who wants to answer?
Carlo said that the point is that in the research infrastructure, you have a variety of activities. They're also dependent on the major scope of the ERIC itself. So you may have administrative roles, you may have research-related roles, you may have communication. So what is important, as Carlo was highlighted, is that there is a sort of horizontal mobility amongst these posts and positions, because this implies job enrichment. And job enrichment means that you learn so many things from by doing other things, but especially having to do with the research infrastructure. The research infrastructure, the job is something peculiar, and you may be in a position to move from in the administrative side and then move on the financial side, and on the I would say general management side or research side. Why not, if you are coming from administration, but within the research infrastructure framework. Now, the point I wanted to intervene before, because we are all aware of the diversity. We are all aware of the different size and also different legislations. So the constraints are under our eyes. What is important is that we define a framework as, an initial framework that make things clear for everybody. So when I was talking about salary caps, saying that according to each country, cost of life, we may have, range, salary range. What is not acceptable in general terms is that ERICS becomes a sort of, a happy island where everything can happen. This is not possible, because this is against the rules of non-discrimination. So ERIC should be the entity where we apply the rules of the country, and the rules of the country are there for reasons that we all share. And what is important is to consider, on the other hand, the fact that being in ERIC may imply some, let's say, additional, aspects that could be considered, like the fact you have to move around, you have to travel a lot, you may subject to a number of pressures they're normally subject in other organizations, and this should be recognized. But again, I don't have a recipe here that should be shared amongst ourselves. Say, oh, this is a secret recipe that we share now. But there should be a procedure, should be a process that we start, by which we create a convergence among amongst all the member states and the ERICs about what are the main principles that we can share. And by that, we can go on developing. It's a starting point. It's not something that we can develop like this in a couple of weeks. This is something will require time. But, this convergence is very important to reinforce, to strengthen the overall ERIC system in Europe.
The question?
There is a suggestion that I have followed when setting up ESRF in Grenoble. Typically, you have in every country a salary grid for research. In the case of ERICs or infrastructures that have a specific job that is connected to an international environment, you could take the national salary grid plus 10%. This is what we did in Grenoble a long time ago. And this worked very well. So you have what is very important is that the description of the jobs is the same. So it's all over Europe the same. For example, in Italy, we have one job description that is unique in Europe, is a technologo, which does not exist anywhere else in Europe. So we have maybe to find something which is unique, is equal in every part of Europe. Include the horizontal mobility, not this vertical separation, which is in some countries, and a salary grid which is connected to the descriptions, but in each country is connected also not too strongly different from the local situation. Otherwise, you have a sort of an isolation effect, which is the isolation effect that has happened to the Joint Research Center in Ispra, for example.
Carla, I would like to add to this, coming to the question that came from one of the people attending this session, is, what are the tasks of people in the ERIC? So I think this simple question shows that a lot has to be done in terms of definition of the principles of the positioning of the ERIC employees. What are ERIC employees? What are the competencies which are required? What is a research infrastructure? I think there should be a preamble which has to do with the, let's say, formulation of what we think is the research infrastructure in Europe and the rights and obligations associated to this and the competence required to be there. And then, of course, all the practical, very practical and useful aspects you are pointing out are to be, a consequence of this general statement about where we are going, what we are, and where we want to go.
You allow me to do another more comment. We have discussed while we are preparing this initially staff rule that we are trying to implement the next year. Even if we are not yet an ERIC, we want to try to have the experience and then adjust when we be an ERIC. Is to do a reference to a national collective bargaining agreement or considering instead a company collective bargaining agreement. This is something that occupied our discussion for a long time. And at the end, we consider that probably the idea to go to a company collective bargaining agreement would have been more useful, at least in our case, because we have a different interlocation, different side, different countries. This open also the interesting aspect that at a certain moment, discussion with unions will arrive. Because without the discussion on union company collective agreement cannot time. In my past, I had an experience, similar experience when I was director of EGO. EGO was the European Gravitational Observatory where the Einstein telescope was conceived, etc., etc. And then in 2016, if I'm correct, we signed a company collective bargaining agreement for research consortia under Italian private law, but with public fund from France and Italy. So it's very special contract that is working now since a few years, but that has been used for some aspect for our attempt now, because already we have a basis that with the Italian unions has been negotiated at a certain level, so we grant that in the future, if we have to rediscuss the future contract with the Italian Union, we are at least on the good track and not having a complex situation. Yeah, and I consider that the ministry can with a leading role, can help us in all these aspects probably in the future.
Any other question?
We just to add a comment, which is a kind of stone on the problems. We have talked about up to now to a collective agreement for eventually for the whole Europe, but there's another problem which stays together with the collective agreement is the problem of the pension funds, of the pension schemes, which are different from country to country and are not always interoperable, apart from the countries which have bilateral agreement. And this is an obstacle even to the transfer of people from one, for instance, in CTA from Berlin to Italy or from Italy to Spain and so on, because one loses part of the pension just transferring inside the same institution. And this is a very heavy problem, which is especially problematic for the older people than for the younger ones who forget the way.
Yes, I know that the matter of the pension schemes is very heavy for the big difference among different systems in Europe. But you know that there is a fund, a suppletive fund for the receiver that is in action since some years, and is very, very important almost for the supplementary pension, because there is, I think there is a few to do for public pension, because all the systems are very rigid in and a matter that every country in Europe wants to preserve for ourselves. But and even in new rules, receiver will have more importance in the future. And it's very, very interesting that all of the research infrastructure entity can know and join a receiver to solve a part of this problem. Maybe in the afternoon there is a connection with Brussels, with the man that follow receiver in the commission.